I was on a solo backpacking trip. I hiked about 18 miles into the Sierra interior and made camp near a lake. I spent 2 nice days fishing with not another human in sight. On the 3rd day, I hiked to the southern end of the lake, down by the dam, to do some fishing. The lake was long and narrow at this point, maybe 50 yards across. I heard some noise and noticed 2 guys across the lake. They were in an established horse packer's camp, furiously piling rocks into a large cairn. I'm talking about a 6-foot-tall pile of rocks. They were working fast and furiously, grabbing bowling ball to watermelon-sized rocks and piling them up at high speed. They were both wearing full camouflage gear with face masks. Meanwhile, I was wearing shorts and a short-sleeve shirt because it was around 80 degrees. But these fully clothed, masked guys were in long sleeves and pants, working like crazy men. It was weird. I wanted to get away from it. I started to quietly back away from the lake into the bush, hoping to disappear, but one of them spotted me. I knew they did because he pointed at me, and they both stopped hurling rocks while he pointed. I waved but kept backing into the bush. At that point, they both started running. Not at me because we had 50 yards of water between us, but rather to their right and towards the end of the lake so they could circle around and get to me. Though they were only 50 yards away across the water, they would have to run about half a mile to reach me by circling the lake. I bugged out. Full sprint panic run towards my tent, which was slightly off trail and a couple hundred yards further up the lake. It was a solo backpack tent and a clean camp, so I was able to strike it down in about 15 seconds. I threw on my backpack, dragging the tent, and raced up a slope away from the lake to a point where I was 100 yards or so above the trail and out of sight. I sat there, quiet and terrified, for 5 minutes until I heard them coming up the trail. They were muttering stuff I couldn't decipher and clearly searching the area as they went by me. I sat there for an hour, silent, praying they wouldn't circle back and find me. I spent that night there without moving, not lighting a fire, nothing, just dead quiet. I woke up the next morning and bugged out in the opposite direction from where I'd last seen them. It was a forced march with a cotton mouth for 10 miles until I started running into some other packers and joined them. I've never been back to that lake to see what was under that pile of rocks. I was going for a random stroll on a trail not far from town when I saw a man hugging a tree. I thought it was weird, so I sped up and circled around the trail. I had to go back the way I came to get to the parking lot, but it had been an hour, so I figured the weird tree guy would be gone by then. Nope, he was still there, hugging the same tree, but this time his pants were down and he was moaning. I booked it out of there as fast as I possibly could. As I got closer to the parking lot, I saw a lady walking towards me with her dog and felt I had to tell her about the creepy tree guy. I couldn't just leave her to stumble upon that with no warning. She decided to leave and find a different place to walk, so we both got in our cars and left. Weirdest thing I've seen out in the woods for sure. Not scary, but creepy. Last year, I was walking in the woods and going by a creek, looking for different mushroom types. I climbed over a log, and on the ground on the other side was a pair of clean sunglasses. This was so weird. No deer stand was above me, and it wasn't hunting season or I wouldn't have been there. I put the glasses in my backpack. The next weekend, I was about 50 miles away, mushroom searching, and went off a trail. I practically crawled under a low tree to move around a sticker bush, and lo and behold, another pair of new-looking sunglasses under this brushy off-trail area. Weird. I then traveled to Oregon. My grandsons and I were playing by a creek in a woodsy area. I went around a small clump of trees to take a leak and found another pair of sunglasses. So very weird. These were expensive sunglasses, so I gave them to my daughter. Still, what the heck? I was camping deep in the Oregon woods with my 2-year-old son and a friend. My friend decided to set up his hammock about 25 yards from my tent. I woke up to the sound of a vehicle peeling out and my friend yelling at me to wake up in a very panicked tone. He said that while I was asleep, a big off-road truck pulled right up to my tent with a couple of guys standing in the back, yelling back and forth to each other. The guys in the back of the truck were drunkenly yelling to the driver, "Run the tent over a couple of times and let's get the fuck out of here." The driver kept saying, "Should I do it?" apparently to the passenger. and a female voice yelled to the guys in the back, "What if it's a family or there are kids in there?" They peeled out and left, which is about when I woke up. My friend said he was too terrified to speak and just watched the whole ordeal. We packed up and immediately left. Not creepy scary, but scary nonetheless. I was about 7 or 8, walking in the woods behind my house with my cousin. We were just puttering around when he started smacking a discarded oil can with a stick. All of a sudden, I felt a pinch at my elbow. It took about 5 seconds to realize we were being attacked by pissed-off hornets. My cousin, who was better at the whole self-preservation thing, took off running. I freaked out, started bawling, and headed home at a walk while the hornets had their way with me. I got home with half a dozen stings already. When my mom took my shirt off to assess the damage, a dozen hornets flew out. All I remember is raw chaos. My mom and my aunt running around, my cousin and I freaking out, everyone shouting. At one point, my aunt had a glass of water she was going to make mud with. I'm not sure why. Something about soothing stings with it? At that moment, a hornet landed on my cousin, and she reflexively doused him with water to get it off. We finally ceded the house to the hornets and beat a strategic retreat to my grandmother's to regroup. My cousin only got stung once, by one of the hornets from my shirt. I forget how many stings I had, but it was somewhere between 8 to 12. I was lucky I only had a very mild reaction to them. If I had been seriously allergic, I might have been in some real trouble. I have 2 encounters that come to mind. As an avid outdoorsman, I've had various experiences in nature, most of them wonderful, filled with the usual beauty and wonder. But these 2 stand out. In the first encounter, I was living in Mission Viejo, California. One day, I decided to head into the Ortega Canyon, just south of my home at the time. The walk was pretty uneventful until a rather large male mountain lion appeared on the trail about 60 feet in front of me. He weighed approximately 180 pounds and seemed to be deciding if I was worth pursuing. This was about 2.5 miles away from my truck, and I only had a small pocket knife on me. Luckily, after a few tense moments that felt like an eternity, he disappeared into the bush as quietly and suddenly as he appeared. I then made it an urgent priority to return to my truck as swiftly as possible. While I've encountered sharks, bears, alligators, and venomous snakes in the wild several times, this was the only time I felt like potential prey. I'll never forget seeing a mountain lion in the wild. In the second encounter, I was out for an afternoon hunt on my father's property. I arrived on the property around 2 in the afternoon and parked at the front of the property, then walked the half-mile to my tree stand. Not seeing any deer while in the stand, I decided to walk the long way back to the truck, hoping to jump a deer on the way. About halfway back, I noticed very fresh boot prints in the mud heading the same way I was going. Mind you, this property is several acres out in the middle of nowhere, and nobody should be there but me. I didn't notice any other trucks on the dirt road leading to the property on my way in. I immediately went on high alert and felt as if I was being watched. The boot prints continued down the trail all the way to my truck. Once I arrived back at the truck, I noticed the prints had circled my truck 2 times before disappearing back into the woods off the trail. I had never been in such a hurry to leave that place in my life. I've had several memorable encounters in the solitude of nature, but these 2 would always stand out as my creepiest by a good bit. As scary as the mountain lion was, the mystery person way out on my father's land, who should not have been there, was kind of terrifying. Enjoy the outdoors, but always keep your guard up. During a solo hike in northern New Mexico in springtime, I was almost back to the car when I heard a cacophony of branches breaking behind me. Given the spring winds in New Mexico, I initially assumed it was just a tree about to topple. But when I looked up, I saw nothing in the treetops. Then, as my gaze shifted downward, I spotted a black bear barreling toward me at full speed. This wasn't a mere bluff charge. It was a full-on, "I'm going to absolutely destroy you" charge. As I fumbled for my bear spray, I distinctly remember thinking, "You've always wondered how you were going to die. Apparently it's being mauled to death by a bear." The bear came to a stop about 15 feet from me, and we engaged in a tense showdown for about 30 seconds. I yelled at the top of my lungs while the bear performed multiple bluff charges. Slowly, I backed away until I reached a small hill and was out of sight. Everyone says never to run from a bear, and I'm glad I didn't initially heed that advice. But once I was out of the bear's sight, I've never run so fast in my entire life. Probably not the best decision, but the fear was palpable. Upon reaching the trailhead, I couldn't contain the overwhelming stress and nausea, and I proceeded to vomit. Surprisingly, I never had to use the bear spray. My guess is I was nearing her cubs, as it was springtime, or perhaps I had startled her. I realized I made the mistake of not making much noise since I was so close to the trailhead. We lived on a steep hill with woods behind our house, which we used to cut through to get to elementary school in the late 1960s. I was 6 years old and my sister was 11. One day, on our way home, we decided to veer off our usual trail and explore a different path where we stumbled upon a pile of magazines. They weren't your typical magazines. They were extremely pornographic, most of them containing images of children. Being so young, we didn't fully comprehend the gravity of our discovery, but we knew we shouldn't be looking at those pictures. We quickly ran home. The following day, we decided to check if the magazines were still there. Moments after we arrived, we heard noises behind us. A man was approaching us. My sister grabbed my hand, and we sprinted up the steep wooded hill toward our backyard, with the man in pursuit. My sister, thinking quickly, led us to another trail that led to a neighbor's yard, as she didn't want the creepy man to know where we lived. We finally reached home, and my father immediately called the police. We provided a description of the man, but he was never found. After that incident, we never ventured through those woods again, and the following year we moved to a different school district. It's an experience I'll never forget. My buddy and I decided to take his dog for a walk in a patch of woods notorious for several satanic cult killings and other murders over the decades. It was dusk in the winter, and as we ventured deeper into the woods, we noticed a trail of blood in the snow. Initially just a trickle, the blood soon widened into a much larger stream and veered off the path. His dog started to grow agitated, but fueled by curiosity, we followed the trail. About 100 yards off the path, we stumbled upon a pile of human-sized organs. My mind immediately raced to the grisly possibility of stumbling upon a murder scene. However, upon closer inspection, I noticed little bits of white fur attached to the organs. It dawned on me that we had instead stumbled upon the aftermath of a deer being gutted. Just 2 weeks ago, my dad and I were camping in the Wichita Mountains, Oklahoma, planning to stay for 2 nights. The first day went smoothly, but it was the events of the first night at our campsite that shook us to our core. As we were preparing to retire to our tents for the night, my dad caught sight of something peculiar out of the corner of his eye. He turned to look, and what we saw in the sky left us stunned. There was a strange blue light moving steadily across the sky, pulsating at intervals. It wasn't like a typical blinking light. Instead, it faded slightly before brightening up again every few seconds. We stood there, transfixed, watching as the light suddenly emitted several beams of blue light in front of it, before disappearing in an instant. We talked to other campers, and to our surprise, they had witnessed the same phenomenon. To this day, we have no idea what it was. Needless to say, we didn't sleep well that night, though that was unrelated to the UFO sighting. I'm an avid distance hiker and often venture out early or late to cover more ground. Despite growing up in these woods and being familiar with its every nook and cranny, my scariest experience occurred during one such early morning hike. It was around 5 a.m. in late spring, the forest cloaked in darkness with the faint glimmer of dawn still a distant promise. I was on mile 5, traversing a narrow, muddy trail hemmed in by dense underbrush and towering trees. Lost in thought, the only sound was the crunch of my footsteps. Then, a sudden crack shattered the silence, freezing me in place. What followed was eerie. Absolute silence, devoid of the usual morning chorus. My instincts screamed at me to retreat if I heard it again. The sound wasn't a typical branch breaking or deadfall. It was deliberate, almost violent. With dread mounting, I realized the trail would soon lead me towards the source of the noise. Dread gnawed at me as I approached a sharp turn in the path, knowing I'd have to turn my back to whatever lurked ahead. Minutes dragged on, each second pregnant with tension. With trembling breath, I crept towards the bend, my headlamp casting ominous shadows that danced on the trail. As I rounded the corner, the stench hit me, a nauseating blend of decay and damp earth that clawed at my senses. I quickened my pace, heart pounding, until the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Not daring to stop, I pressed on until the forest was bathed in daylight and the birds resumed their chorus. I've encountered countless sounds and scents in these woods, but that morning's encounter remains an enigma. It defied explanation, leaving me haunted by the unknown. My sister and I went into some woods because her boyfriend at the time called and said he was going to off himself. We found him sitting against a tree trunk. He said he wanted me to leave and my sister to stay so he could talk with her. I asked him for his pistol first and he said no, so I asked for the clip out of the gun. He handed me the clip and I walked out of the woods with it. Then I heard 2 gunshots and I was terrified. I stood there, too scared to go back to see if my sister was okay, and then there she was, walking toward me. He had shot up in the air. We ran to our vehicle and left, calling the sheriff's department. What a wonderful Easter morning. I was a little shitback in school and would regularly skip classes. If I was on my own, I'd go to this wooded place, sort of triangulated by a main road on one end, another road lined with factories and warehouses, and the third side backed onto an estate with some bungalows and detached houses. It was a little green spot in an otherwise built-up large town in the UK. In between these 3 boundaries, there were fields that gave way to overgrowth, which then gave way to a group of around 30 to 40 trees. Not exactly deep in the woods or anything. Anyway, we had built a little den area in there to smoke weed and drink undetected by police. One day, I was truanting there and had fallen asleep on this bent, gnarled tree that was almost parallel to the ground, sort of like a hammock. I was woken by the sound of someone or something walking nearby, suggesting they did not want to be heard. I leapt to my feet, and there was nobody and nothing there. No dog, cat, or deer that had maybe strayed too close to me and dashed off startled. I couldn't see anyone or anything in the trees or the undergrowth beyond, but I could feel something was there, watching me. My blood ran cold and everything. Needless to say, I fucked off home sharpish and pretended there'd been a flood at school that day to explain my early return. I have no idea what or who that was, but I am convinced I came close to getting attacked by some weirdo or bitten by a rabid fox or something. I stumbled upon someone who had fallen off a small cliff. I called an ambulance and sat there waiting with her, hoping she wouldn't die. It was probably an hour or less, but it felt more like 4 hours. A helicopter came and found us with a heat-seeking camera, hovering above us for ages looking for a safe spot for the guy to rappel down to us. The wind was so strong, like a hurricane, and splattered water from the creek up my back. I was shivering, leaning over the girl to protect her, alongside other bushwalkers who came to help. They airlifted her out, and she survived with a broken neck, no spinal damage, and some broken ribs. After 3 months in bed with a full neck brace, she contacted me and took me out to a Japanese restaurant to say thanks.